New York City is a place that never really seems to sleep, but on a Friday night, it feels like the entire city is holding its breath, waiting for something exciting to happen. The streets are packed with yellow taxis and people rushing to their next destination, but in this specific part of town, the energy is different. It is not just busy, it is exclusive. This is where the city's most expensive and popular restaurants are lined up one after another, each one trying to look more glamorous than the next. Outside one particular upscale spot, the sidewalk was crowded. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume, cologne, and the faint aroma of gourmet food wafting out from the kitchen doors. A long velvet rope was set up near the entrance, acting as a barrier between the normal people walking by and the VIPs waiting to get in. At the end of the rope stood a large, imposing bouncer. He held a clipboard in one hand and wore a headset, looking like a guard protecting a castle full of treasure. The line of people waiting to get inside was full of individuals trying very hard to look important. There were women in sparkling dresses that probably cost more than a car, and men in suits that were perfectly tailored. They were checking their reflections in the dark windows, laughing loudly to show they were having a good time, and constantly glancing at the bouncer, hoping their names were on the list. Everyone wanted to be seen. Everyone wanted to prove that they belonged in this world of luxury and status. While all this commotion was happening, a figure emerged from the shadows of the street and started walking toward the restaurant. He didn't come in a limousine or a fancy sports car. He didn't have a screaming crowd of fans chasing him or security guards pushing people out of the way. In fact, if you didn't look closely, you would have thought he was just another guy who had finished a long shift at work. It was Keanu Reeves. He was wearing his usual simple clothes, a well-worn leather jacket that had obviously seen better days, a basic t-shirt, jeans that looked comfortable rather than stylish, and a pair of boots that were scuffed at the toes. He had a small backpack slung over one shoulder and his hair was slightly messy, blowing a little bit in the cool night breeze. He walked with a steady pace, his eyes looking straight ahead but taking in everything around him. He didn't walk with the arrogant strut that many people in this area seemed to have. He didn't demand space. Instead, he moved with a quiet confidence, stepping aside politely to let a hurried couple pass by on the sidewalk. There was a calmness about him, a sort of peaceful vibe that made him seem out of place in such a high-energy, pretentious environment. As he got closer to the restaurant, the people standing in the VIP line began to notice him. You could see the ripple effect go through the crowd. One person whispered to another, eyes widening in recognition. Phones were subtly lowered and heads turned. It was that moment of confusion where people ask themselves, is that really him? Because it is so rare to see a major movie star just walking down the street alone, looking so human. Some people smiled, enjoying the surprise of the sighting, while others looked at his clothes and then back at their own expensive outfits, perhaps wondering why he didn't dress the way they expected a superstar to dress. But Keanu didn't seem to notice the whispers or the stares. He was just hungry. He had been working all day, likely dealing with the pressures of his job, and just wanted a quiet meal to end his night. He approached the velvet rope, not with the attitude of someone who owned the place, but with the manners of someone who respects rules. He didn't try to cut the line or wave his hands to get attention. He simply waited for a break in the conversation near the entrance. The atmosphere at the door was tense. The bouncer was being tough, turning away a group of guys who weren't dressed expensively enough, enjoying the power he had to decide who was cool enough to enter. He was focused entirely on the image people projected. He was looking for flashiness, for brands, for signs of money and status. Keanu finally stepped up to the front, standing just a few feet away from the big bouncer. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and looked at the entrance. The noise from inside was loud, filled with music and chatter. To Keanu, it probably looked like a warm place to sit and have a burger. He didn't see the social hierarchy. He just saw a restaurant. He stood there quietly, patient and polite, waiting to be acknowledged. He didn't pull out a phone to look busy, and he didn't look annoyed at the wait. He just stood there, a gentle soul in a city that often rewards the loud and the aggressive, The bouncer, busy checking his clipboard and looking important, turned his gaze toward the next person in line. His eyes landed on Keanu. He looked at the messy hair, the old jacket, and the boots. He saw a man who looked like he belonged on a motorcycle or at a dive bar, not in this high-end establishment. The bouncer didn't see the star of blockbuster movies. He didn't see the man known worldwide for being one of the nicest people in Hollywood. He just saw someone who didn't fit the image of the club. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the velvet rope as the quiet actor stood before the gatekeeper of the night. The crowd held its collective breath, sensing that a very interesting interaction was about to take place. Keanu took a small step forward, ready to speak, completely unaware that his simple request was about to become a lesson in character, that everyone watching would remember for a long time. He was just being himself, calm, humble, and real, which was something this fake world was entirely unprepared for. The bouncer standing at the velvet rope was a young man who clearly took his job very seriously. He was tall and broad, wearing a tight black suit that was meant to make him look intimidating, and for the most part it worked. He stood with his chest puffed out, holding a clipboard like it was a royal decree. To him, this wasn't just a restaurant door. It was a gate to a special club, and he was the only person who held the key. He had spent the entire night turning people away, enjoying the small rush of power it gave him to decide who was important enough to enter, and who wasn't. When the young man finally turned his attention away from the shiny cars pulling up to the curb, his eyes landed directly on the figure standing quietly at the front of the line. He didn't see a movie star. He didn't see a person who has entertained millions of people around the world. All he saw was a man in a worn-out leather jacket and a backpack. In the bouncer's mind, this was the uniform of someone who didn't belong. He looked at the scuffed boots and the messy hair, and an immediate judgment formed in his head. He decided right then and there that this man wasn't the right kind of customer for a place like this. The bouncer didn't smile. He didn't offer a polite greeting. Instead, he took a step forward, placing himself squarely in Keanu's path. He stuck out one arm, his hand rigid, creating a physical barrier between the actor and the entrance. It was a dismissive gesture, the kind used to stop someone from crossing a line they weren't supposed to cross. "Sorry, man," the bouncer said, his voice loud and firm. He didn't even try to be nice about it. "We can't let you in tonight." Keanu stopped walking. He didn't look angry or surprised. He just looked at the bouncer with a calm expression, waiting for the rest of the sentence. He assumed there was a simple reason, maybe a private party or a fire code limit. He stood there with his hands at his sides, looking patient. "The dress code is strictly enforced tonight," the bouncer continued, glancing down at Keanu's jeans with a look of disapproval. "And honestly, we are completely booked solid. It's members and reservations only. You're going to have to try somewhere else down the street." The way the bouncer spoke was dripping with arrogance. He wasn't just saying no. He was saying that Keanu wasn't good enough. He was looking down his nose at him, enjoying the chance to assert his authority. He expected Keanu to argue. He expected him to get mad, maybe raise his voice, or turn around and storm off in embarrassment. That was usually how these interactions went. People hated being rejected, especially in front of a crowd of onlookers. But the onlookers were the real problem for the bouncer, even though he didn't know it yet. By this point, quite a few people in the line and on the sidewalk had realized who was standing at the door. The whispers were getting louder. People were nudging each other and doing double takes. They were pulling out their phones not to call for help, but to record the scene. They were fascinated. They couldn't believe that someone was treating Keanu Reeves like a regular person who didn't matter. There was a strange tension in the air. The crowd felt like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. They saw the actor standing there, looking humble and soft-spoken, and they saw the bouncer treating him like dirt. It was uncomfortable to watch. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Would Keanu pull off his sunglasses and reveal himself? Would he mention the billions of dollars his movies have made? Would he get angry? However, Keanu did none of those things. He stood there and took in the bouncer's words. He didn't look at the people filming him. He kept his focus entirely on the man blocking his way. It was almost as if he felt bad for the bouncer. He could see that this young man was trying to be important, trying to prove something. Keanu shifted his weight slightly, glancing at the busy restaurant interior through the open door. He could see the tables full of people laughing and eating. It looked like a nice place, but it also looked loud and chaotic. He looked back at the bouncer, his face relaxing into a soft, almost apologetic smile. "Oh, okay," Keanu said. His voice was quiet, barely audible over the noise of the city, but it was full of respect. "I understand." "No problem at all?" The bouncer blinked. He wasn't expecting that. He was ready for a fight. He had his tough guy defense up, but Keanu had just disarmed him with a simple sentence. The actor didn't try to argue about his clothes. He didn't say, "Do you know who I am?" He didn't pull out his phone to show his Wikipedia page. He just accepted the answer. "I didn't realize it was so busy," Keanu added, nodding his head slowly. "I appreciate you letting me know. I don't want to disturb anyone." He stepped back from the velvet rope, creating space between himself and the bouncer. It was a small movement, but it spoke volumes. It showed that he wasn't going to force his way in. He respected the rules, even when they were being enforced rudely against him. The crowd nearby was silent now, stunned by the interaction. They saw a man who had every right to be arrogant and angry, choosing instead to be polite. It was a rare sight in a city that often runs on ego. The bouncer, however, didn't see the beauty in the moment. He just saw that he had won. He had successfully kept the riffraff out. A smug look spread across his face as he marked something on his clipboard, mentally checking off another victory for his ego. "You have a good night." "Man," the bouncer said, but his tone was dismissive, as if he was talking to a child. He turned his back slightly, already looking past Keanu to the next group of people arriving in a taxi. Clearly signaling that the conversation was over, Keanu stood there for one more second. He looked at the bouncer's turned back, then at the people watching him. He gave a small, shy nod to a few strangers who were staring at him with open mouths. He didn't want them to make a scene. He didn't want them to yell at the bouncer on his behalf. He just wanted the moment to pass peacefully. He adjusted his backpack strap, pulling it up a little higher on his shoulder. With one last look at the restaurant he wasn't allowed to enter, he turned around and started walking back down the sidewalk. He didn't stomp his feet. He didn't shake his head in disgust. He just walked away with the same calm, steady pace he had when he arrived. Behind him, the whispers turned into murmurs. People were asking each other if that really just happened. The bouncer went back to checking his list, feeling proud of himself, completely unaware that he had just made a massive mistake. He had judged a book by its cover and missed the incredible story inside. As Keanu disappeared into the night, the atmosphere at the door shifted. The arrogance of the bouncer hung in the air like a bad smell, contrasting sharply with the humble dignity of the man he had just refused. The stage was set for the realization that was about to hit. The silence that followed the refusal was heavier than the noise of the city traffic. In a place like New York, where everyone is always rushing and shouting, a quiet moment can feel very loud. The bouncer stood with his arms crossed, his chest still puffed out, waiting for the reaction he was sure was coming. In his line of work, he dealt with big egos all night long. He was used to people shouting, arguing, or pulling out their phones to show their bank balance just to prove they were worthy of walking through a door. He was ready for a fight. He actually wanted one, in a way, because it would make him feel even more powerful to shut down a difficult customer, but Keanu didn't do any of that. He didn't shout, and he certainly didn't argue. For a few seconds he just stood there, looking at the bouncer with a look that wasn't angry, but rather understanding. It was the kind of look you give someone when you realize they are having a hard day, even if they are being rude to you. It was a look of deep empathy. The people standing nearby were practically holding their breath. The whispers had stopped completely, and the air was filled with tension. Everyone in the line knew who this man was. They had seen his movies, they knew his face, and they knew that he could buy this entire restaurant if he really wanted to. They were waiting for the moment where the real, Keanu would appear the celebrity who is used to getting whatever he wants. They expected him to step up, pull off his sunglasses, and ask the bouncer if he had any idea who he was turning away. They wanted to see the sparks fly, because that is what entertainment is all about. And this felt like a scene from a movie. However, that moment never came. Instead of getting angry, Keanu's shoulders just dropped a little, relaxing. He didn't feel the need to prove himself. He didn't feel the need to use his fame as a weapon. To him, the bouncer wasn't an enemy. He was just a guy doing a job. A guy who was trying to enforce rules that maybe didn't make much sense, but rules nonetheless. Keanu seemed to understand that the bouncer was caught up in a system where appearances meant everything. And for tonight, his appearance just didn't fit the mold. Keanu took a small step back and gave a soft, almost invisible nod. It was a gesture of respect. He looked the bouncer in the eye, not with intimidation, but with a calm steadiness that cut through all the fake glitz of the evening. "I get it," Keanu said quietly. His voice was gentle, carrying no anger or sarcasm. "Strict dress code. I respect that. You have to keep the standard for the place. I don't want to mess that up for you." The bouncer blinked, completely caught off guard. This wasn't the script he was used to. He felt his grip on his clipboard loosen. He had prepared a speech in his head about how money doesn't matter and rules are rules, but this man was agreeing with him. The actor wasn't fighting back. He was actually validating the bouncer's authority. It was a disarming move that took all the wind out of the bouncer's sails. Suddenly, the bouncer didn't feel powerful anymore. He just felt like he was blocking a nice guy for no good reason. "No problem at all," Keanu continued, offering a small, tired smile. "I appreciate you letting me know before I tried to come in. It saves me the trouble of embarrassing myself in there." He spoke as if they were two friends having a casual chat on the street corner, rather than a gatekeeper and a person being rejected. There was no sarcasm in his voice, no hidden insult. He was genuinely thanking the bouncer for doing his job. It was a level of humility that almost no one possesses, especially when they have been treated with disrespect. The crowd watching the scene was mesmerized. They were seeing something that rarely happens in the modern world. They were seeing someone choose peace over conflict. They saw a man who had every right to be angry, choose to be kind instead. It wasn't an act. It was just who he was. He wasn't playing the celebrity card, but he also wasn't playing the victim. He was just being a human being, treating another human being with decency. Even when that decency wasn't being returned, Keanu adjusted the strap of his backpack one last time. He didn't look at the people gawking at him. He didn't look for cameras or try to make a scene that would end up on the news the next day. He just turned away from the bright lights of the restaurant entrance. "Have a good night, all right?" Keanu said to the bouncer, giving a small, friendly wave. Then he simply turned around and began walking down the sidewalk. He didn't stomp away in anger. He didn't storm off to find a manager to complain. He walked with the same steady, calm pace he had when he arrived. He blended back into the shadows of the street, disappearing into the flow of the city just like any other person. The bouncer stood there frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly open. He felt a strange pang in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. It was a mix of confusion and a sudden, heavy realization of what he had just done. But for now he shook it off, turning his attention back to the line of shiny cars and hopeful patrons, trying to convince himself that he had done the right thing. But the energy at the door had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet unease. The silence that Keanu left behind was deafening, and it was about to get a lot louder. For a few moments after the actor walked away, the bouncer tried to go back to his normal routine. He straightened his jacket, checked his watch, and looked down the line of waiting people, trying to act as if nothing unusual had just happened. He wanted to maintain the image of the tough, unbothered gatekeeper. But the atmosphere around the velvet rope had changed completely. The air wasn't filled with the usual tension of people hoping to get in. It was filled with a heavy, awkward silence. People were looking at him not with fear or respect as they usually did, but with looks of confusion and disbelief. The whispers started small, rippling through the crowd like a wave. Someone near the front of the line, a woman in a sparkling dress, leaned over to her friend and whispered the actor's name loudly enough to be heard. Was that Keanu Reeves?" she asked, her eyes wide. Another person pulled out their phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then held up a picture next to the spot where the man in the leather jacket had just been standing. The resemblance was undeniable. The bouncer heard the name, but it didn't click immediately. He heard Keanu and thought they were talking about some random guy. But as more people started talking, the murmurs grew louder. "I can't believe he just did that," one guy said, laughing in disbelief. "He just turned away John Wick," someone else muttered. The bouncer's blood ran cold. He froze in place, his hand gripping the clipboard so tightly his knuckles turned white. Suddenly, the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in his mind. The beard, the sad eyes, the messy hair, the incredibly polite attitude, it all made sense now. He hadn't just turned away a random guy in old clothes. He had just humiliated one of the most famous and beloved actors in the world. A man known for being generous, kind, and down-to-earth had just stood right in front of him, treating him with respect. And the bouncer had treated him like trash. A wave of panic crashed over the young man. His heart started pounding in his chest, so hard he could hear it in his ears. He looked down the street, but the sidewalk was crowded. The actor was nowhere to be seen. The realization of what he had done was terrifying. This wasn't just about a customer complaint. This was about his job, his reputation, and the potential embarrassment of the entire restaurant. If this story got out, and he knew it would, because there were already people filming it, he would be the internet's villain. He would be the guy who kicked out Keanu Reeves. The people in the line were now looking at him with open judgment. They were whispering about how rude he was, how arrogant he had acted. The bouncer felt his face burning hot with shame. He felt small. The power he felt just minutes ago had completely evaporated, leaving him feeling exposed and foolish. He couldn't just stand there and pretend he was cool. He had to fix this. He didn't know if he could fix it, but he had to try, without thinking. The bouncer unbuckled the velvet rope and stepped out from his post. This was a big deal. Bouncers aren't supposed to leave their posts unless it's an emergency. But to him, this was an emergency. He began walking briskly down the sidewalk, peering over the heads of the pedestrians. "Excuse me," he muttered, pushing past people who were blocking his way. He felt desperate, sweating in the cool night air. He walked about half a block down the street, scanning the crowd frantically, worried that he had missed his chance to apologize. Just as he was about to turn back, he saw a familiar figure under a streetlight. It was the actor, walking slowly, looking at the window of a closed store. He looked just as calm as he had when he left the restaurant, seemingly unbothered by the rejection. The bouncer broke into a jog, his fancy shoes slapping against the pavement. As he got closer, he felt a knot of nervousness in his stomach. He was about to confront a man he had just insulted, and he had no idea how he would react. He expected anger. He expected to be yelled at. He honestly deserved to be yelled at. "Sir?" "Wait, please." The bouncer called out, his voice breathless and shaky. The actor stopped walking and turned around slowly. He didn't look annoyed. He just looked curious, waiting to see what the commotion was about. He held his ground as the bouncer caught up to him, stopping a few feet away, gasping for air. "Mr. Reeves," the bouncer stammered, his face flushed red. I am so sorry. I didn't realize it was you." The actor stood there, his expression soft. He looked at the panicked young man, taking in his distressed state. He didn't look angry. He didn't look like he was planning a revenge scene. He just looked at him with those kind, understanding eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," the bouncer continued, the words rushing out of him. "I was just looking at the clothes and not the person. I feel terrible about it. Please, come back. We can get you the best table in the house right now. The manager would kill me if he knew, but honestly, I just want to make it right. Please come back inside." The bouncer's voice was trembling. He was laying his pride on the line, begging a stranger for forgiveness. He was ready for the actor to laugh in his face, to say, "Too late," or to humiliate him the way he had been humiliated. The street was busy, and people were starting to stop and watch this new interaction. The bouncer felt the eyes on him again, but this time he wasn't the powerful gatekeeper. He was just a guy who had messed up big time and was trying to fix it. He stood there waiting for the judgment to fall. The silence between them stretched out for a few seconds, feeling like an eternity. The bouncer watched the actor's face closely, looking for a sign of anger, a smirk, or a roll of the eyes. But what he saw surprised him. He saw a look of genuine concern, as if the actor was worried about the bouncer's stress levels. It was a reaction that defied everything the bouncer knew about how famous people were supposed to act. The bouncer stood there, his chest heaving slightly, waiting for the reaction he was sure was coming. He had messed up, and he knew it. In his mind, he had just ruined the night of one of the most famous people on the planet. He expected the actor to laugh in his face, to make a sarcastic comment about how he could have bought the restaurant, or to simply turn around and walk away in angry silence. That is what most people would have done in that situation. But the man standing in front of him didn't do any of those things. Instead, Keanu Reeves stepped a little closer. He didn't step back to protect his space. He stepped forward to close the distance. A look of genuine concern washed over his face. He saw that the bouncer was stressed, sweating, and genuinely terrified of the mistake he had made. The actor's first instinct wasn't to defend his own ego. It was to comfort the person who had just been rude to him. "Hey, take it easy," Keanu said softly. His voice was low and soothing, exactly the opposite of the bouncer's anxious tone. "Please, don't worry about it. There's no need to panic." The bouncer blinked, completely confused by the reaction. He had prepared himself for a confrontation, not a calm conversation. "But I was so rude," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I treated you like you were nobody. I feel terrible about it." "You have every right to be angry." Keanu shook his head gently. He reached out and placed a hand on the bouncer's shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried a lot of weight. It was a gesture of equality. He wasn't looking down on the bouncer, and he wasn't afraid of him. He was just connecting with another human being. "You weren't rude," Keanu said, his eyes sincere. "You were just doing your job. You have a dress code, and you have a responsibility to the restaurant to maintain a certain image. I get it. I wasn't dressed for the place. You were just following the rules. There's nothing to apologize for." The bouncer stood frozen, absorbing the words. He realized that the actor was giving him a way out. He was accepting the blame for the clothes he was wearing just to make the bouncer feel less guilty. It was a level of grace that the bouncer had almost never witnessed in his life. In a world where everyone is quick to blame others and demand respect, here was a man who was taking the hit for a mistake he didn't make, just to save a stranger's feelings. "Really, I am okay," Keanu continued, taking his hand back and shoving it into his jacket pocket casually. "I actually prefer to find a quieter spot anyway. It's a bit too loud for me in there tonight. So honestly, you did me a favor." A small, nervous chuckle escaped the bouncer's lips. He couldn't help it. The situation was so absurd, and the kindness he was receiving was so overwhelming, that he didn't know how else to react. He felt a huge wave of relief wash over him. The knot of anxiety in his chest began to loosen. "Are you sure?" The bouncer asked one last time, just to be safe. "Because if you want to come back, I will make sure they treat you like a king. No questions asked." Keanu smiled that familiar, sad but warm smile that people know from the movies. "I am sure," he said firmly but kindly. "Just go back to work. Don't let me keep you from your job. And seriously, don't stress about it. It's forgotten." He extended his hand toward the bouncer. The bouncer looked at the hand for a second before reaching out and shaking it. It was a firm handshake, solid and respectful. In that handshake, the bouncer felt a transfer of respect. He realized that this man, with all his money and fame, respected the job of a doorman more than many of the people wearing $1,000 suits inside the club. "You take care of yourself," Keanu said, giving a nod. "You too, sir," the bouncer replied, his voice full of genuine admiration now. With that, Keanu Reeves turned around and continued down the street. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for applause or thanks. He just walked away into the night, fading back into the shadows of the city. Leaving the bouncer standing alone on the sidewalk, the young man stood there for a long time, watching the figure disappear into the distance. The streetlights flickered and the cars zoomed by, but everything felt different now. He walked back to the restaurant, but he wasn't walking with that arrogant, chest-puffed-out strut from earlier. He was walking slower, his head down. Deep in thought, when he got back to his post at the Velvet Rope, the line of people was still there. A group of guys in flashy suits walked up, looking at him with that familiar look of entitlement, expecting to be let in immediately because of how they looked. But the bouncer didn't see them the same way anymore. He didn't just see clothes or money. He saw people. He remembered that the coolest, most famous person he had met all night was the one in the worn-out jacket who treated him with kindness. He treated the next group with the same professional attitude. But the arrogance was gone from his own demeanor. He was just doing his job, but he was doing it with a newfound respect for everyone waiting in line. The whispers from the crowd had changed, too. People weren't talking about the rude bouncer anymore. They were talking about the incredible class of the actor, who refused to let a bad experience ruin his night or someone else's as the night went on. The story of what happened spread through the line and eventually into the restaurant. It became a lesson for everyone lucky enough to witness it. True class isn't about what you wear, what car you drive, or how much money you have in the bank. True class is about how you treat people, even when they treat you poorly. It is about staying calm in the face of disrespect and choosing kindness. When you have every excuse to be angry, the bouncer would never forget that night. He realized that he had met a real-life hero, not because the man could fight or act, but because he had the strength of character to remain humble in a world that constantly tries to make you feel important. As the city lights flickered and the noise of the night continued, the young man stood a little straighter, carrying a quiet reminder of that lesson in his heart. Always be nice. Because you never know who is standing on the other side of the door.